Hey guys, tonight we begin with a topic the ancient Japanese approached with deep reverence, quiet beauty, and a love for the little things, village life. From meditative tea rituals to the soft hush of forest paths lined with cherry blossoms, this world was more peaceful, intentional, and spiritually rich than most of us are after a full digital detox and a good cup of green tea. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The forest awaits. The wind moved slowly, as if reluctant to disturb the silence. A silence not of absence, but of reverence, the kind that lingers in places where time does not pass, but breathes in the cradle of a forgotten valley, hemmed in by mountains and forested slopes, like outstretched arms in eternal prayer. There lay a village whose name was never written, only remembered, a place where the earth whispered in the voice of the ancestors, and every stone was a vessel of time. Its mornings were soft with dew and awakening incense, the scent of sandalwood and cedar curling like old memories through paper walls. The villagers rose not to clocks, but to the rhythm of the birds, cranes and sparrows, lifting their voices in songs older than any scripture. Children, quiet as lantern light, padded across bamboo floors. Elders bowed to the sun. And in the heart of it all, the tea house stood not at the center of the village, but at its still point. Woven from timber and time, its roof curved like a mountain's breath, and its doors slid open not with a sound, but with a sigh. Here, the ceremony was not performance, it was devotion. Each motion was a metaphor. The washing of the bowl, the whisking of the matcha, the turning of the cup, all were echoes of something deeper. The cleansing of the mind, the stirring of the soul, the offering of the self. Could a single leaf, steeped in water, hold the memory of 1,000 years? The tea master, old as riverstones, moved with such slowness that it seemed the world waited for him. His hands, veined and worn, carried the weight of lineage, not just of practice, but of purpose. His eyes, half closed, saw more than they revealed. To him, the heat of the water was a kind of spirit, the tea a mirror, the guest a sacred reflection of the host. Outside, the cherry blossoms had begun their yearly reign, a snow of pink and white, soft as breath. Petals touched roofs, touched hair, touched the surface of the tea, and then were gone. Like thoughts in meditation, like lifetimes, there was no word for hurry in this place. Only patience, only presence. Even the forest held its breath. Each path that led away from the village curved like a brushstroke, intentional, elegant, incomplete. Pine needles softened the steps of travelers, and the rustle of leaves was as sacred as scripture. Beneath the canopy of ancient trees, time turned circular. A walk was not to reach a destination, but to remember something long forgotten, something beneath the ribs, beneath the noise. And so the village lived, not in resistance to time, but in rhythm with it. Here, suffering was not erased, it was steeped and offered, like bitter herbs in the brew. For what is sorrow but unspoken prayer? What is aging but a scroll unrolling slowly in the hands of the divine? Is not the falling petal more beautiful because it falls? In this place, the seasons were not measured, they were honored, each one a teacher. Spring with its promise, summer with its ripening, autumn with its release, and winter with its silence. A silence that asked the soul to listen. So the village breathed, slowly, softly, and as the moon rose that night, casting silver across the shoshi screens and quiet forest paths, the tea house remained lit. A single lantern glowing in its center, a flicker against the vast unknown dot, and somewhere deep in the folds of night, the tea master whispered to the steam, "What if stillness is the oldest language?" The petals fell, and the petals kept falling, each one a silent syllable from the mouth of the wind, drifting through the dark like forgotten prayers returning home. The tea master did not sleep that night, but neither was he awake. He sat, spine straight as a pine, gaze unfixed. The steam rising from the tea bowl was not simply vapor. It was a memory ascending, of past winters, lost voices, and the soft surrender of impermanence. Outside, the trees spoke in creaks and whispers, their limbs swaying like monks in slow-moving chants. And in this quiet, something stirred, not in the body, but in the space behind thought, where truth resides before it takes shape. By morning, the village wore a robe of petals, roofs, paths, even the water basins, all dusted in cherry bloom. The villagers walked carefully, as though each step might disturb a delicate spell. Children laughed, but even laughter felt sacred here, round and light, like wind chimes in spring. Old women swept the petals with woven brooms, but never hurried, never cleared too much, as if to clean everything would be to lose something holy. There was a boy, small, silent, curious, who followed the tea master from a distance, always watching, never asking. He was the son of a fisherman, born during a thunderstorm that split the mountain skies. He did not speak much, but his eyes were the color of lake water in autumn, clear, deep, still. That morning, he lingered outside the tea house, barefoot on stone. As the tea master opened the doors, a breeze moved through them like a guest, uninvited, yet honored. The boy stepped inside, and the old man nodded without turning. Each morning, the master said, voice like rice paper folding, is a scroll not yet written. Would you like to write one with me? The boy said nothing. He simply knelt, and so it began. Not a lesson, but a transmission. Not through words, but through rhythm, through repetition, through reverence. The way to bow, the way to cleanse the bowl, the way to listen not to the sound, but to the silence that holds it, is knowledge past or remembered. Outside, the mountains glowed with morning haze, their edges softened like thoughts not yet formed. The bamboo groves rustled like an old story retold to the wind. In the distance, someone rang a small bell 3 times, not to signal time, but to acknowledge it. A monk walked the perimeter of the village, carrying a wooden staff that struck the earth in slow cadence. Step, pause, step, step. Even his journey was ceremony. By the river's edge, women washed robes in silence, the fabric folding like waves in the current. Water, the eternal teacher, accepting all, resisting none. And in the sky, cranes glided like ancient brushstrokes. Were they birds or reminders? Back in the tea house, the boy watched as the master poured water from a black clay kettle, its spout worn smooth by decades of pouring. The sound of the water was unlike any other, soft, sacred, like the world exhaling. The tea leaves swirled, releasing their green mystery. This, the master said, is not tea. The boy looked up. This is time, steeped and offered. And perhaps it was. Perhaps each ritual was a mirror held to the soul. Perhaps every sip held the weight of lives unspoken, of wars survived, of love lost and found again beneath the cherry trees. Can healing be sipped? Can presence be learned? The boy did not answer. He only watched the steam rise, eyes reflecting the flame beneath the kettle. And for a moment, he was not a child. He was a vessel, the kind carved not with tools, but with time and outside. As the wind sighed through the trees and petals fell into the waiting river, the world remained still, a stillness that was not empty, but full of beginnings, full of remembering. And above the mountains, the sun rose like a golden bell, struck without sound. The sun had risen, but not loudly. It came like a monk's breath, slow, invisible, undeniable in the village. The air was thick with light, not the kind that blinds, but the kind that reveals, soft-edged, golden, touching each surface with reverence, as though the morning itself was bowing to the roofs, the trees, the soil. The boy left the tea house with silence stitched into his sleeves. His bare feet moved across the stone path like wind across paper, and the old master remained seated behind him, still as a mountain shrine. The last wisps of steam curling into the rafters above. Somewhere down the hill, the sound of a flute drifted through the plum trees hollow, melancholic, like longing carved from bamboo. It came from the shrine-keeper's son, who played only at dawn, facing east. No one asked why. Perhaps it was prayer, perhaps it was memory, or perhaps it was both, for are they not the same? The boy passed the carp pond, where orange and silver bodies moved like fragments of dream, circling ancient stones beneath the surface. Water reflected sky. Fish reflected thought. The ripples moved outward, always outward, and he wondered, as only children can wonder, if stillness can hold a world, why do we run from it? Past the pond and into the woods, the path narrowed, not with walls, but with invitation. Bamboo leaned inward like bowed monks, their joints creaking softly in the breeze. Moss bloomed between stones, like memory between years. This was the forest path his mother had taken when she was with child. She had whispered stories here, of fox spirits and moonlight deer, of flowers that opened only for the patient. She had once said, "Every step on this path is watched, but not by eyes." The boy did not fear the woods. He feared only forgetting them. Farther in, past a bent cedar and a broken Tory gate, there lay a clearing, round as a coin, quiet as the inside of a bell. In its center, a flat stone sat like a meditation. Like uncovered, it bore no markings, no names, only presence. It was called the listening stone. Here, villagers came not to speak, but to listen. To what? To the wind, yes. To the soil, yes. But, more often, to what stirred inside them once everything else had gone quiet. The boy sat upon the stone. He closed his eyes, and the forest welcomed him not with fanfare, but with surrender. Birdsong softened, branches stilled, even the insects, it seemed, waited, and within that quiet, something ancient stirred. Not a voice, not a word, but a weight, like the memory of the ocean inside a shell. He did not understand it, but he felt it, as if the stone was not a stone, but a mirror, and it reflected not the face, but the soul. Was this what the tea-master saw in the steam? Was this why silence felt heavier than speech? Somewhere beyond the trees, the river moved, its sound low and eternal. And farther still, in the direction of the mountains, a drumbeat echoed once, deep and slow, from a monastery hidden behind the cliffs. It was a bell without metal, a call without voice, a reminder. The boy opened his eyes. The wind had picked up. Petals from the village. Trees now drifted through the woods, white and pink against the dark green. Some caught in branches. Others landed softly beside him. Ash and blossom. One, a memory of burning, the other, a promise of return. He stood, and as he walked back toward the village, each step carried the weight of something unseen, as if he, too, was beginning to steep, not into adulthood, but into awareness. And the forest watched, not with eyes, but with stillness. Back in the village, the tea master waited. The kettle simmered. The cup was empty. The ritual had not ended. It had only just begun. The sun, now higher, painted shadows across the tatami floors like calligraphy, not written by hand, but by the brushstrokes of time itself. The tea master sat still, yet somehow he moved, for even in stillness there is motion, just as in silence there is voice, and in heedless flame there is the secret of all alchemy. The kettle whispered. Its thin plume of steam curled upward, like spirit rising through matter. Beneath it, a bed of charcoal glowed, not fierce, not hungry, but steady, red as memory, warm as longing. This was not ordinary fire. It had been tended with care, lit before dawn with pine twigs selected the night before. Each ember chosen, each breath of air coaxed with discipline. Because tea, real tea, begins not with water, but with flame, and flame, in turn, begins with intention. The tea master reached forward, fingers like river reeds, and adjusted the lid of the kettle. He did not look at the fire. He felt it, as though the warmth itself spoke in a language he had learned long ago, before he had words, before he had a name. Is the flame outside or within? At that very moment, the boy returned, quiet as a falling blossom, barefoot, wind-kissed. He entered the tea house without knocking, because no door can bar one who walks with presence. The tea master did not turn, yet something in the air shifted. A smile without form. The boy sat opposite the fire. For a while, neither spoke, but much was said. The boy's eyes drifted toward the embers, watching how they pulsed, dimming, brightening, never fading. His breath began to follow their rhythm. Inhale with the glow. Exhale with the hush. Inhale with the glow. Exhale with the hush. Then, softly, the tea master spoke. Do you see the fire? The boy nodded. And where does it live? The boy paused, uncertain. He looked down, then up, then into the space between. In the charcoal, he guessed. In the kettle, in the room. The old man smiled, eyes crinkling like folded silk. Yes, and no, he said. It lives in what we choose to give it. And there it was, the secret wrapped in simplicity. The fire beneath the kettle was not just heat, it was attention. Without tending, it would die. With too much force, it would consume. But with patience, it became something else, a teacher in that moment. A soft wind passed through the open shoshi screens, lifting the edge of the mat. The smell of camellia drifted in, mingling with the scent of roasted tea. Outside, the cherry trees were nearing their last bloom petals, now falling in clusters, like farewells whispered by the season itself. Come, the tea master said. He stood, slow as tide, and gestured for the boy to follow. Together, they stepped out into the sunlight. The village was alive, not with noise, but with presence. A woman tying cords around scrolls in the temple archive. A man carving new roof tiles with a hand chisel. A child mending a fishing net older than her father. Every act was ritual, every gesture prayer. They walked along the path beside the carp pond, where the water now shimmered gold with morning light. At its edge, the tea master paused and pointed. "What do you see?" The boy leaned forward. Beneath the surface, the fish moved in slow circles, but something else caught his eye. A reflection. The roof of the tea house, the curve of the clouds, and his own face, blurred by the ripples. "Me," he whispered. The old man nodded, double quotes, and now, disturb it. The boy touched the surface. The ripples spread. His face dissolved. Lesson. The boy blinked. That the face is not real. That the water lies. That we disappear. "No," said the master. "That we return, always, but never the same." He turned back toward the tea house, the sun casting a long shadow behind him. But the boy remained, watching the pond, letting the image settle again. And as his reflection slowly returned, softened by light and stillness, he saw not just himself, but possibility. And perhaps that was all the fire ever meant to teach. Evening did not arrive suddenly in the village. It unfolded like the slow unrolling of a scroll. Dusk bled gently across the ridgelines, soaking the sky in plum and ash. The cicadas began their low murmur, not loud, not rushed, but like monks repeating a single sacred syllable under their breath. And the village exhaled. Lanterns were lit one by one, their glow not to chase away the dark, but to honor it. The boy sat again in the tea house, now lit with amber flame. The kettle whispered. The air held a hush. The master poured water over dried green leaves with a reverence usually reserved for the divine, each gesture precise, not mechanical like calligraphy drawn, not with ink, but with breath. And then the tea, bitter, deep, quiet. It was not meant to please the tongue, it was meant to awaken the soul. "Your hands will learn the ritual," the master said softly, "but your spirit must become it." The boy nodded slowly. Outside, a painter laid out sheets of rice paper beneath a maple tree. His tools were modest, brush, stone, and well water. But as he dipped the bristles into ink, something larger moved through him. His hand obeyed not his will, but something older, the rhythm of roots, the pull of the moon, the memory of a mother's voice. One stroke, pause, breath, and another. He did not paint what he saw. He painted what wanted to be seen. Back in the tea house, the master lifted a small scroll from behind a cabinet. Its frame was lacquered with age, its string worn smooth from 1,000 unknots. He opened it carefully and laid it before the boy. It was blank. The boy blinked, looked again. Nothing but parchment, yellowed, empty, waiting. "What is this?" he asked. The tea master smiled. "A record, but there's nothing here." "Oh," the master whispered, tilting his head. "Then what do you feel?" The boy looked down again, and this time the silence hummed, not with absence, but with fullness, like a room just emptied of voices, yet echoing with their meaning. Like a bell that had been rung long ago, its sound, still pulsing in the bones of the air. He touched the parchment lightly, and in that moment, he understood. The scroll was not empty. It was listening. It held every lesson unspoken, every truth passed through glance, every ritual repeated beneath breath. It was the ink before the ink, the page before the thought. Some truths, the master said, do not wish to be written. They wish to be lived. Outside, a small gust stirred the cherry trees. A final handful of petals broke loose and drifted through the village like memory returning. Some fell into bowls. Some floated down the stream, One landed on the tea master's shoulder, and he did not brush it away. "Why do we preserve things?" the boy asked. "Why write scrolls, carve stone, pass rituals?" The master did not answer immediately. Instead, he stood, walked to a narrow alcove where an ancient stone sat, worn smooth, black as ink, veined with silver lines. He knelt and traced those lines with his finger. "This stone," he said, "was once part of a mountain. Now it holds only silence. But look deeper." The boy knelt too. He looked, he waited, and slowly, like mist revealing form, the veins of silver began to shimmer, not with light, but with meaning. The lines curved like rivers, like the stroke of a brush, like the folds of a sleeping crane's wings. "It remembers," whispered the master. "It does not speak, but it remembers." The boy's heart beat slowly, deeply. So must we, and perhaps that was the lesson of all things sacred, not to preserve the past, but to allow the present to remember it, to become the ritual, to carry the ink, to let memory live through motion. Outside, the first stars began to pierce the dark like gentle needles through silk, and somewhere in the hills a bell rang once, low and slow. The day folded itself inward, and in the tea house the boy poured the water, lifted the bowl, and drank. The night deepened, but it did not darken, it simply turned inward. In the quiet hush of the village, the houses seemed to breathe. Paper walls pulsed gently in the breeze. Lanterns flickered like old memories caught between letting go and lingering. And far off, near the mountain's nape, the monastery bell rang a second time. Not loud, not hurried, just once. A single note wrapped in eternity. The boy lay awake on the tatami mat. His eyes traced the ceiling beams, each one darkened by years of smoke, incense, and steam. They carried the scent of generations. In their grain, he imagined the rings of trees, a memory not only of age, but of seasons survived. He was not sure what had changed in him, only that something had. Earlier, he had walked the stone path, alone. The kettles still sang in the tea house, and the master had not followed. Some journeys, the old man had whispered, begin with silence and end in silence, but in between, you must walk. So he had walked past the shrine gate, past the river reeds, past the bridge where red cloth ribbons danced like forgotten prayers. The wind had picked up, and with it came the faint smell of pine and earth, like a memory of fire just extinguished. Eventually, he reached a clearing he had never seen before, not large, not hidden, just unnoticed. There, in the center, a single cedar tree stood, tall, bowed, ancient. Its bark was split and twisted, as if it had once held lightning in its core, and at its base, an old stone bowl sat half buried in moss. Within the bowl, a single seed. He crouched beside it, touched the stone. It was warm. He did not know why, but he bowed, not out of tradition, but instinct. Something in the air held the weight of ceremony, though no one was watching, no one but the tree. He lifted the seed. It was smooth, dark, small, ordinary, and infinite. Why here? He thought. Why now? And then, like water returning to its shape, he remembered the master's words. There is a fire in everything, but only the quiet can feel it. He stood, looked up. The cedar's branches reached high, silhouetted against the stars, like fingers etched into sky. Around him, the forest breathed with him. He felt it, the pulse, the rhythm, the shared silence between roots and soul. He planted the seed, no ceremony, no chant, just earth and intention. Then he sat beside the bowl and waited, not for growth, but for stillness, because he had begun to understand. We do not plant to see, we plant to become, and perhaps that seed, nestled in soil, mirrored his own becoming. Something stirring, quiet and unseen, not blooming, but becoming. When he returned to the tea house, hours later, the master was asleep, not sprawled or snoring, but upright, back straight, head bowed, hands resting atop his knees like a statue in mid-prayer. The boy did not wake him. Instead, he knelt beside the hearth and listened to the silence. And in that silence, he heard a question rise within him like morning mist. What is more sacred, the blossom or the root? He did not answer. He only breathed, and somewhere, perhaps in soil, perhaps in soul, the seed began to stir and to stir. Dawn did not break. It unfolded, like a silken fan drawn open by the hands of the wind. The first light came not from the sun, but from the mist, soft and pale, a drifting veil that kissed the surface of the river and lingered like breath on cold glass. The mountains, still cloaked in twilight, watched in silence, their shapes barely distinguishable from dreams. The boy rose before the birds. He did not wash his face with haste, nor did he reach for breakfast. Instead, he walked barefoot, quiet, like he was tracing the fading echo of a prayer once whispered by the trees. The village was still. The houses held their slumber gently. Even the smoke from the hearths waited. He followed the winding path down to the water, not the place where children played or fishermen cast nets, but farther, to where the stones grew green with moss and the air smelled faintly of iron and stories. There, the river slowed. It did not rush or shout. It glided, as if remembering the time before names. He sat on a flat rock near the edge, legs folded, back tall, the posture taught by the tea master. But there was no ritual here. No bowl, no scroll, no ember, only breath, and the sound of water being water. The river whispered, not in words, but in rhythms. And the boy listened. He listened with the space between thoughts, with the pause between heartbeats. He listened not to learn, but to remember, because something about the river felt familiar, not in body, but in soul. As a child, he had once asked his grandmother why the river curved instead of flowed straight. She had smiled and said, because water does not seek to be fast. It seeks to belong. Now, he understood. The river curved because it felt it bent for roots, for stones, for the earth's memory. It turned not to avoid, but to honor, and in that gesture he saw himself. Had he not curved around his own pain, around his doubts, his longing, his quiet hunger for meaning? Was that weakness, or was it wisdom? He reached into the water. It was cold, but not unkind. The current passed through his fingers like silk unraveling. Never the same water twice. He cupped a handful and watched it slip away. Can we hold anything, he wondered, without losing it? The wind stirred the reeds. A crane lifted from the bank and glided low over the surface, its reflection fluttering in and out of coherence. For a brief second, the boy felt as though the bird was flying through him, not the air. And perhaps it was, because we are not separate from the stream. We are the stream. We are the stone, the current, the leaf. The pause. The boy closed his eyes, and in the stillness, something moved within, a memory, not of this life, but of all life, of rivers that once flowed beneath stars, long gone, of songs, sung in caves. Of fire, discovered and forgotten, of hands that shaped bowls, and lips that drank from them with reverence. When he opened his eyes, The mist had thinned. The sun, now rising, kissed the trees with amber fingers, and the river shimmered, not with light, but with awareness. He stood slowly, bowed to the water, not as a boy, but as a mirror. He walked back to the village with wet hands and a quiet heart. The tea house waited. The master would be there, not with answers, but with silence, and in that silence, perhaps, a name would return. The village stirred like an old scroll being gently unrolled. Sparrows fluttered in the rafters. A distant wooden mallet struck rice into paste with a slow, measured rhythm, not for urgency, but for balance. The wind moved through the cedar trees like the breath of something ancient, something watching. The boy returned to the tea house with steps quieter than his thoughts. Inside, the master was kneeling by the hearth, arranging charcoal with a curved iron tongue, not too close, not too far, just as one might adjust stars in a constellation they alone remember. He looked up, but did not speak. His eyes, half-lidded with sleep or stillness, met the boy's and held him there, not as student, not as guest, but as witness. The boy bowed, then sat. The kettle was already whispering. Steam rose in spirals, slow, and unhurried, vanishing into air, or perhaps transforming into it. The tea master poured the water. The leaves danced. The fragrance bloomed between them like an unseen flower, not sweet, not bitter, something beyond the tongue. They drank, and in the warmth of the first sip, the boy felt something loosen, not in the body, but somewhere deeper, a knot in the soul, a silence within silence. "Master," he said, finally, "last night I planted a seed." The old man did not reply right away. He closed his eyes, took another sip, and held it on his tongue as if tasting more than tea. Then softly he spoke. "All things planted in stillness bloom differently." The boy nodded. "But how will I know if it grows?" The tea master placed the bowl before him, not as answer, but as offering. "By becoming like the seed," he said, buried and listening. The boy blinked. He had expected instruction. Instead, he was given a riddle, or perhaps a doorway. The wind stirred the paper walls again. One of them shifted slightly, revealing a scroll hanging in the alcove beyond. It was painted with a single kanji character, brushed in deep, black ink. The strokes were bold, confident, yet carried the tenderness of rain on still water. The boy had never noticed it before. "What does it mean?" he asked. The tea master turned to the scroll and smiled, faintly. "It means moo," he said. "Nothingness, emptiness," the master replied, "but not the absence of meaning. The presence of space. The space where meaning is born." The boy looked again. The brushstrokes seemed to shimmer, not with light, but with invitation. "Is this the beginning?" he whispered. The master shook his head. "No, it is the middle that feels like a beginning." He stood and walked to a small wooden chest. From it, he withdrew a tiny jar of ink, dark as midnight, sealed with red wax, and a brush carved from bamboo. Its bristles fine and silken. He set them before the boy. "Today," he said, "you will write your name." The boy's hand froze. "But I don't know who I am." The tea master nodded. "That is why you must begin." The boy lifted the brush. The ink gleamed like the river before dawn. He hovered the tip above the parchment. Time held its breath. In his mind there was no clear shape, no letters, no sound, only feeling. So he moved the brush slowly, with care, not to form what was known, but to trace what was felt. The strokes came like memories never spoken aloud, curves like wind in long grass, dots like rain on old roofs, lines like paths walked in solitude. When he finished, the parchment held something strange. Not a name, but a mark. Not a signature, but a soul print. The master leaned forward, peering at it with a gaze both soft and deep. "Who is it?" the boy asked, and the master, smiling as one who has seen many moons, replied, "Whoever you choose to become." Outside, the river murmured. The seed beneath the cedar turned unseen, and the petals still clung to the last of the cherry trees. Their fall not a sorrow, but a continuation. The ink dried, not quickly, but with intention. It drank the air like memory finding form. The boy gazed at the mark he had made, not with pride, not with doubt, but with stillness. For it was not a conclusion, nor a declaration. It was a mirror, and in its curves and edges something pulsed softly, as if the parchment itself breathed. The tea-master reached for the scroll and rolled it gently. His fingers practiced in the motion, not to store away, but to bless the moment. "Every beginning," he whispered, "is simply an echo of something older." The boy tilted his head. "Older than what?" The master's eyes gleamed like the surface of a still pond catching starlight. "Older than the questions." Later, that morning, the boy wandered from the tea-house, his steps slow, as though each footfall were choosing its own rhythm. He did not follow the path this time. Instead, he walked opposite the wind, opposite the usual flow of villagers heading toward the shrine. He walked backward, toward the forest, toward the forgotten well, toward the hill they called, the one that remembers. It was not a sacred place, by name. No rituals were held there, no offerings made. Yet old ones said that when clouds gathered above its trees, the air turned thick with silence, and sometimes, when you stood alone there, you could hear footsteps behind you, though no one followed. It was not fear he felt, it was recognition. The boy climbed slowly, the way you would ascend into memory. The slope was gentle, the grass dewed with a coolness that kissed his ankles. Birds circled above, but no calls rang out. Only the wind spoke in rustles, in sighs, in tones that felt like forgotten lullabies. At the top of the hill there was a flat stone slab, worn, moss-covered and cracked. He sat upon it, not because it was meant for sitting, but because it waited. Below him the village unfolded like a tapestry, roofs of straw and clay, smoke curling into blue sky, and tiny figures moving like brushstrokes across the earth. For the first time he saw how small it was, and how whole. He exhaled slowly, and in that breath he wondered, what if the journey forward is actually a return? And what if remembering is not about the past, but about becoming whole again? He reached into his sleeve and touched the scroll he had carried from the tea-house, his soul print. He did not unroll it. He only pressed it to his heart and closed his eyes, and when he did, he saw something. A garden, half wild, half tended. A woman humming a song with no words. A bowl of steamed rice on a wooden table. His own hands, small and soft, reaching for warmth. A moment, ordinary, long vanished. Yet here it was, not in time, but in essence. The boy opened his eyes. The wind had picked up. Leaves spun in slow spirals around him. The stone beneath him pulsed faintly, not literally, but like a drum beneath the surface of thought. He listened, and the hill, ancient and unmoving, seemed to whisper, "You are not lost. You are returning." He stood, not with haste, but with certainty. He walked down the hill, this time forward, but slower, like a man following the steps of a dance he once knew in a dream. At the edge of the path, an old woman waited. She held a small basket of dried herbs and root vegetables, her back bent with years, her eyes sharp with knowing. She looked at him. "You walked the remembering path," she said. He nodded. She handed him a single plum. "Then you'll know when to eat this," she smiled. He bowed, took the fruit, and continued walking. The sun had tilted in the sky now, casting long shadows that reached like fingers toward home. The boy returned to the village, to the tea house, to the warmth of coals and steam. But he returned, different, not with answers, but with roots, and beneath the cedar tree, far away. Unseen, the seed he planted cracked open, not with sound, but with promise. Evening fell, not like a curtain drawn, but like a breath held. The village shimmered in the amber hush of twilight. Each shadow stretched long and deliberate, as if the world itself were exhaling slowly after a long remembrance. Lanterns blinked to life one by one, each glow a soft affirmation that the dark was not to be feared, only met. The boy sat alone on the wooden ingawa, the porch just outside the tea house. His feet dangled above the packed earth. In his lap, the plum waited. It was small, dark red, almost purple, the skin taut and cool from the woman's basket. It had not yet ripened to its sweetest form, but it carried something else, something older than sweetness. He turned it slowly in his fingers, watching how the light curved across its surface. "You'll know when to eat this," she had said, but how? There were no instructions, no signs, only a feeling, and perhaps that was the point. The tea master emerged from the sliding screen behind him, as quiet as a breeze. He did not sit beside the boy, nor speak. He stood for a while, watching the wind stir the maple leaves across the courtyard. Then, without a word, he placed a single object beside the boy, a tiny brass bell. Old, simple, untarnished. The master turned to go. The boy looked at the bell, then at the plum, then at the sky, and he felt it. A pause, not an interruption, but an invitation. He held the plum in one hand, the bell in the other. What is it, he wondered, that tells us a moment is ripe? What awakens the fruit? The bell, the self? He closed his eyes and listened. The world was not silent, but it was still, a different kind of silence. Not emptiness, but fullness held in restraint. He thought of the river, the seed, the ink on the scroll, the curve of the path, the woman on the hill. Every moment seemed to spiral inward toward this one. The bell was cool against his fingers. He rang it just once. The sound floated upward, clear, bright, impossibly gentle. It did not fade. It dissolved, like mist touched by sun. And as the last breath of its chime vanished into the dusk, the boy bit into the plum. It was sour, shockingly so. His lips puckered, his eyes blinked, and for a moment he tasted the sharpness of everything, the ache of memory, the sting of change, the raw edge of truth. Not cruel, not sweet, just real. He swallowed and smiled, because he understood. The plum was not meant to please, it was meant to awaken. Sometimes the right moment isn't soft. Sometimes it stings. And in that sting, we remember we are alive. The tea master returned as if summoned not by time, but by transformation. Was it ripe? He asked. The boy nodded slowly. Yes, he said, but not in the way I thought. The master smiled, knelt beside him, and together they watched as the final light sank beneath the forest ridge. Above them, a single star emerged, not the brightest, but the first dot, and somewhere beneath the soil, where roots whispered in darkness. The seed stretched further, not upward, not downward, but inward. Because becoming is not a reaching, it is a remembering. Night deepened, not in darkness, but in depth. The stars had gathered like soft punctuation across the ink-black sky, scattered not with logic, but with grace. A waxing moon drifted above the cedar trees, caught in a slow dance with passing clouds, its silver light spilling into the folds of rooftops and hollowing out silence. Like a vessel meant to be filled, the boy did not sleep. Sleep would come, yes, but only after something unnamed had passed through him. He sat by the low candle, its flame steady, a golden bead within a sea of shadow. Beside it lay the scroll of his soul print, still tightly rolled, its edges curled ever so slightly, with breath and memory. He had not unrolled it since that morning. He didn't need to. The mark lived now, inside him, in his breath, in his pause, in his gaze upon the world. He leaned back against the wooden pillar, knees drawn toward his chest. The air was cool, laced with the scent of pine and faint incense from a neighbor's window. Somewhere, a nightjar sang its hollow call, and then another sound, soft, hesitant. A knock, 3 fingers on wood. He stood, curious but not alarmed, and slid open the door. There stood the girl from the plum orchard, the one with the braid-like black rope, and the eyes that never rushed. She held a lantern not lit, and a folded cloth in her hand. "I heard your bell," she said simply. He tilted his head. "I rang it only once." She smiled faintly. That's how far it traveled. They stood in silence for a moment, the kind that holds not tension, but possibility. Then, wordlessly, he stepped aside, and she entered. She set the unlit lantern on the floor and unfolded the cloth. Inside it, 2 small rice cakes, wrapped in fig leaves, humble offerings, yet sacred in their simplicity, the kind that nourish something deeper than the body. They shared them without ceremony, chewing slowly, without urgency, as if each bite was its own moonrise. After the final morsel disappeared, she picked up the lantern. "Would you walk with me?" she asked. He nodded. They stepped into the night, the tea house fading behind them, swallowed gently by the hush of sleeping roofs and the perfume of garden herbs. The path they followed was familiar, yet felt new in the moonlight, as though the stones themselves had shifted slightly to meet their bare feet. Still, she did not light the lantern. "Why carry it unlit?" he asked at last. She glanced down at it, cradled in both hands. "Because I don't need it to see," she said. "I need it to remember." He furrowed his brow gently, not confused, but inviting explanation. She continued. "There was a story my grandmother told about a lantern that never held fire, yet always glowed, but only for those who had once been lost. And you?" he asked. "Have you been lost?" She smiled again, not sad, not proud. Many times. They reached a clearing where the cherry trees, now empty of blossoms, stood like silent monks in the moonlight. Their branches, though bare, carried a grace not of spring, but of waiting. She set the lantern down in the center of the clearing. Then she sat. He joined her. No fire was lit, and yet he saw it. A faint illumination, not from the lantern, but from her. A warmth radiating not through light, but presence, as if beneath her skin. Something glowed, and suddenly he felt it in himself. Not heat, but recognition. A soft truth bloomed between them. Perhaps we are all lanterns, carried through time, not to banish darkness, but to remember we are not made of it. He placed his hand upon the ground. fingers splayed. The soil was cool, still, and somewhere beneath, roots moved, not seeking, but knowing. The girl looked at him and said, "You're not who you were." He met her gaze and replied, "Neither are you." And the moon overhead turned slightly, as if listening. The clearing held them, not as guests, but as kin, to quiet figures beneath sleeping cherry trees, their breath mingling with the scent of moss and moonlight. No wind stirred, no branch cracked. Even the night seemed to pause, listening not with ears, but with presence. They sat across from one another, the boy and the girl, and between them the unlit lantern, now no longer a thing, but a symbol, a space, a vessel for what cannot be spoken. The boy's hand still pressed gently into the earth. It anchored him, yet offered no demand. The girl's eyes reflected the moon, but her thoughts drifted elsewhere, inward, perhaps, or backward, to a time not marked by calendars, but by moments. Finally, she spoke, soft as the hush before snowfall. "There was a tree near the river," she said. "When I was small, it never bloomed like the others. Every spring we waited, but its branches stayed bare." She paused, looking toward the skeletal limbs above them. "One year," she continued, "a traveler came. He sat beneath the tree for 7 nights, said nothing, touched nothing, just waited." The boy listened, his fingers now moving slowly in the moss, as if tracing something only he could feel. And on the 8th night, she whispered, a single blossom opened. Silence. Then the boy asked, "Why?" She shrugged, the kind of shrugged that meant more than uncertainty. Some things bloom only when they are seen, not expected, not judged, just seen. The boy leaned back and exhaled, long and slow. The moon climbed higher. The cherry branches overhead stretched in delicate arcs, like brush strokes across parchment sky. Though bare, they whispered secrets, not in language, but in shape. And then he remembered. The soul print, the ink, the way it flowed from his hand, not as writing, but as revealing. "What if," he said quietly, "we are not meant to be understood?" She tilted her head. "What if," he went on, "our truest selves aren't petals to be admired, but roots, hidden, deep, silent?" She nodded slowly. "Roots don't ask to be known," she replied. "They only ask to be honored." A small breeze stirred then, finally, rustling the dry leaves at their feet. From the nearby branches, a single petal fell, not from blossom, but from memory, because sometimes a tree forgets it is in bloom until someone watches. The lantern flickered. Neither of them touched it. Neither of them looked surprised. It did not catch fire, nor glow in gold, but it breathed. A pulse of warmth radiated from within, like the last light of a dream just before waking. It was subtle, fragile, but real. The girl smiled. "You see," she said. He did not with his eyes, but with something else, something older than seeing. The night deepened around them, but they remained, not to wait for something more, but because there was nothing else they needed. In stillness, the lantern remembered its flame, and so did they. Is light a thing we carry, or something that remembers us when we forget? By dawn, the village was still sleeping, not the heavy sleep of forgetting, but the soft slumber of beings held gently by time. Thin strands of mist curled above the rooftops, and the sky, pale with promise, began to spill hues of pearl and faint lavender across the distant mountains. The air was cool, like water untouched by sun. The boy returned to the tea house with bare feet and quiet breath. In his hands, he carried the lantern, now warm, though it held no flame. Each step was intentional, not because the path demanded care, but because he listened. The old master was already waiting on the tatami floor, kneeling before a lacquered tray. On it rested 3 bowls, 2 filled, 1 empty. The boy knelt beside him without speaking. The girl had not followed. She had gone her own way before the light broke, as if her part in the unfolding had always been to meet him at the lantern's edge, and then dissolve like dew. The master gestured toward the tray. "Tea," he said. They sipped, not to warm the body, but to return to it. The earthy bitterness touched the tongue, then melted into breath, as though reminding the soul, "You live here, still." Then the boy's eyes wandered to the 3rd bowl, empty, clean, waiting. "For whom?" he asked. The master did not answer at first. He reached forward and turned the bowl slowly in his hands, like a moon being rotated to reveal a hidden side. "For the guest who never arrives," he said at last. The boy furrowed his brow gently. "Why serve someone who is not coming?" The master smiled, and there was a silence, the kind shaped like a doorway. "Because perhaps they already have," he said. He placed the bowl back on the tray. "Or perhaps," he added, "we are not serving them, but leaving space for what cannot be served." The boy stared at the empty bowl. It gleamed faintly in the early light, not with sadness, but with possibility. It was a presence, not an absence, like a pause in a poem, or the silence between 2 plucked strings. And then, he thought, is emptiness always lack, or could it be invitation? He reached out and touched the rim. The porcelain was cool, yet seemed to hum faintly beneath his skin, a vibration not of sound, but of memory. The master poured no tea into it. Instead, he bowed his head toward the bowl, and the boy understood. Not all vessels are meant to be filled. Some are meant to remind us of the space we keep untouched, for wonder, for grief, for the unnamed guest that visits only when the door is unbarred. They drank in silence, and when the tray was cleared, the master spoke again. "It is time." The boy met his gaze. "For what?" The old man did not answer with words. He rose slowly and motioned toward the small wooden alcove near the eastern wall, the tokonoma, where scrolls were hung and flowers offered not for beauty, but reverence. In the alcove, a new scroll had been placed. Its calligraphy was bold, yet soft, alive, yet settled. 3 characters, drawn in a single breath. The boy stepped closer and read them, silently. Mukon-ku, emptiness, sky, possibility. The master bowed to it. The boy followed, together. They knelt before the ink, not to worship it, but to let it unfold them. Because sometimes, the deepest truths are not told, they are held. And sometimes, the bowl left empty on purpose is the one that fills us most. The scroll remained unrolled for 3 days. No one touched it. No one spoke of it. And yet, the entire village felt it. A quiet presence in the air, like incense from a distant temple, drifting into every open window, every bowl of rice, every moment of pause between words. Even the wind, it seemed, had learned to bow as it passed the tea house, lowering its voice to a hush as if in reverence. The boy swept the stones near the koi pond that morning. The broom, in his hands, moved slowly, brushing not to clean, but to remind the ground that it was seen. The pebbles shifted in deliberate patterns beneath his fingers, circles, arcs, a single spiral that never ended. His body moved with rhythm. His breath matched the silence of the trees, and somewhere within him, a new root had grown. He was not the boy who had first followed the path beneath the cherry blossoms. He had become a kind of mirror, not reflecting others, but reflecting the unseen, what the wind carried, what the leaves forgot to speak, what the stars whispered before vanishing with dawn. As he finished his task, the master approached, holding a folded cloth. Inside it, a single feather, long, curved, dark grey, with a silver streak running through its spine. The kind of feather not dropped, but gifted by a crane, perhaps, or a dream. The boy looked at it, then at the master. "What is it for?" he asked. The old man didn't reply. He simply opened his palm and let the wind take it. The feather lifted, hovered, danced briefly in midair, then began to fall. But just before it touched the earth, it caught a breath of wind and turned, spiraling upward again, not in defiance of gravity, but in conversation with it. The boy watched it disappear into the morning light, as if it had never needed a reason to fly. The master smiled. "Did you see?" "I did," said the boy. "And did you understand?" The boy was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, not with certainty, but with something wiser. Perhaps the feather never wanted to land. Perhaps it only waited for the wind to ask permission. The master nodded once. "Good," he said. "Now follow me." They walked through the village together, slowly, without haste. Every elder they passed bowed their heads slightly, not out of habit, but as if acknowledging something invisible walking beside the boy. A spirit, a question, a memory returned. They passed the carpenter's workshop, where the scent of cedar lived like a second skin, past the well, where moss grew in secret alphabets, past the plum orchard, where the branches no longer bore fruit, but stories, and finally, they arrived at a narrow gate. Long unopened, the master stepped aside. "You go alone from here." The boy turned. "What is beyond?" The old man's eyes were soft. "A path that cannot be shown." The boy looked down at his feet. Then beyond the gate, a trail of uneven stones disappeared into the forest's edge, where light flickered like candle flame through swaying bamboo. He stepped forward. The gate creaked open, not with resistance, but like an old breath being remembered. And as he passed through, the boy whispered, "What if the wind only lifts those who learn to kneel first?" The gate closed behind him, and the trees ahead waited, not to teach, but to listen, to listen. The boy walked into the hush of trees. No footsteps followed, no sounds behind. The world before him had changed, not loudly, but entirely, but entirely. The bamboo rose on either side like green cathedrals, their stalks swaying ever so slightly in the breeze, creating a rhythm more ancient than music. The path beneath his feet was dappled with filtered light, where shadows painted stories in broken gold. Every leaf seemed to breathe. Every branch held memory. And the air felt thick, not with weight, but meaning, as if the forest had gathered its silence over centuries and now offered it like a cloak. The boy walked slowly, and with each step he shed something. Not clothes, but names, stories, the idea of being someone. What remained was not emptiness, but presence. After a while, he reached a clearing where a small stone shrine sat beneath a bent pine. It was simple, weathered by rain, softened by time. On its flat surface, a single offering rested, a smooth black stone with one side painted in white, forming the shape of a crescent moon. The boy knelt. He did not know the name of the shrine, or to whom it was built, but somehow that made it more sacred, like a prayer left open. waiting for each visitor to finish it. He touched the stone gently. Cool, silent, whole. A soft wind passed through the trees, lifting a curl of dry pine needles and tossing them into the air. They spiraled downward like lost letters, and one landed in the boy's open palm. He closed his fingers around it and smiled. Even the fallen have form. He rose and continued on, deeper into the forest. As the trees thickened, the light shifted, not darker but quieter. It was the kind of light that did not announce itself, but waited to be noticed. And there, beneath a crooked camphor tree, he saw something unusual. A circle of worn stones, each with a crack running through its center. Within the circle, a shallow pool of still water. He stepped closer. In its surface, his reflection shimmered. Not quite his face, but a softer version. Not younger, not older, just truer. And then, a question arose, not from outside, but from within. What do you see when nothing watches you back? He stared into the water, and for a moment, the boy could not tell if the pool held his reflection or remembered it. Then, without thinking, he reached into his sleeve and removed the scroll of his soul print, still sealed, still untouched since it was drawn. He unrolled it. The ink had faded slightly, but the lines remained, curved, winding, impossible to explain. He dipped the edge of the scroll into the water, not to erase it, but to let it change. The ink bled softly, unraveling into the pool in gentle tendrils. His soul print began to melt, not disappear, but release. He did not resist. He knelt beside the stones and whispered, "If I let go of who I've been, will I become what I am?" The forest did not answer, but something in the trees leaned closer, not with movement, but with attention, because sometimes the deepest transformations happen not with fire, but with stillness. And sometimes, to meet ourselves fully, we must first allow our image to drift away. The scroll, now wet and softened by the pool, lay quietly beside him, no longer a map, but a memory. The ink no longer formed lines. It flowed as rivers do, meandering, gentle, free. What had once been a record of the self had become part of the forest, and perhaps that, too, was the truth he had sought. He sat for a long time beside the pool, watching the last strands of ink dissolve. Then he rose. There was no sorrow, only a strange peace, like the silence that follows a song, still echoing, long after the final note has faded. The path ahead narrowed and sloped upward. Roots coiled beneath his feet like old questions. Stones jutted from the earth like forgotten truths. He did not climb with haste. Each step felt chosen, as if the mountain asked him not to conquer, but to listen. And still, he did not know what he was seeking, but he trusted now that not knowing was its own kind of vision. Above him, the trees began to thin. Bamboo gave way to pine, pine gave way to rock, and soon the mountain opened to sky, vast and unending, blue, deep enough to drown in. There, perched on a high ledge, stood a mirror, ancient, tall, framed in dark wood. Its surface had dulled with time, but it still caught the light in flickers, enough to be seen, but never quite fully understood. No one else was there, no shrine, no offerings, no monks in prayer, just the mirror. Waiting, he approached it slowly, not out of fear, but reverence. When he stood before it, he looked not with the eyes of a boy, but with the heart of a question, and what he saw was not a reflection, but a story. There, in the mirror, played a vision, a child running through plum blossoms, laughing, a younger version of himself, chasing dragonflies near the rice fields, a teenager sitting alone beneath a cedar tree, fists clenched, tears falling soundlessly. Then the long walk to the village, the tea house, the old master's face, the girl beneath the cherry trees, the lantern, the scroll, the pool. Each moment appeared, not as memory, but as petal, unfolding one after the other, drifting across the mirror's face, dissolving as they passed, then darkness, and then light. Not from outside, but from within. The mirror was no longer showing his past, it was becoming him, or rather, it was showing the shape of the space he had carved within. Himself. Empty. Still. Luminous. The boy reached out. But the mirror did not accept touch. Instead, it spoke not in sound, but in knowing, a whisper that came from no mouth, and yet stirred every fiber of him. You do not become the mountain by climbing it. You become the mountain by realizing it was always within. He stepped back, tears welled, not from sadness, but from recognition. The mountain, the forest, the lantern, the silence, the scroll, none were outside of him. They were all names for the same thing. The mirror faded. Its frame cracked gently, as if it too had completed its journey, and the wind circled once around him, not cold, not warm, just true. He closed his eyes, and in the space behind his ribs, where questions once stirred like restless birds, there was only stillness. So what if we are not seeking answers, but places to return to ourselves? He did not descend the mountain. He simply returned, not lower, not lesser, but gentler, like water that had once been mist, then rain, then river, now choosing again to become sky. The path no longer felt like a climb or a descent. It curved softly, endlessly, like the inner rim of a bowl designed not to hold tea, but time. Each step was a soft agreement with earth, with breath, with being. The forest greeted him not with fanfare, but with still eyes. Trees bowed with the same quiet they had offered his arrival. Even the birds remained hushed, as though they too understood. Something had changed, and it must be spoken of only in silence. At the bend where moss grew thickest, he paused. There, half buried in the loam, rested a small, round pebble. Unremarkable. Grey. Uncarved. And yet, the boy knelt and picked it up. It was warm, not from the sun, but from meaning, the kind of warmth found in things that have waited a long time to be seen. He held the pebble in his palm for a long while, as if it were a question he'd forgotten how to ask. Then, gently, he whispered, "If even a stone can endure centuries unnoticed, what might we become if we simply endure?" He closed his hand around it and continued walking. This was no longer a journey, it was a pilgrimage, not to arrive, but to remember. At the edge of the village, the air changed again, filled now with the scent of steamed rice and pine smoke. Children's laughter, faint but real, wound its way through the alleys. An old woman sat spinning thread on a wooden spool, her fingers slow and steady as breath, the same and not the same. The boy stepped through the narrow gate, and the lantern above the door rattled once, just once. In the breeze, the master was sitting in the garden, facing a stone basin filled with water and fallen plum petals. He turned and smiled, not with surprise, but with recognition, as if he had been watching the pebbles return. "Not the boy's, you carried it," the master said. The boy opened his hand and offered the stone. "No," he replied, "it carried me." The master nodded. "Then you understand. they sat together beneath the persimmon tree, whose fruit now glowed orange and gold in the soft afternoon light. The bowl was set between them again, the third, the empty one. The boy reached for it, not to fill, not to drink, but to offer it forward, and suddenly he knew. This bowl was never meant for tea. It was a mirror, a lantern, a mountain, a scrolled dot. It was every form of emptiness that teaches us presence. The boy set the pebble inside. A sound rang out, small, subtle, and deep. Not a clink, but a chime, dot, and the master whispered, "Some stones must fall into silence to become music." They bowed, dot, not to each other, but to the space between them. And somewhere in the woods behind the village, the wind curled gently through the trees, not lost, not searching, just home. That evening, the village held no festival. There were no drums, no lanterns lifted into the night sky, no songs weaving through the trees, and yet the air shimmered with celebration, the kind that lives quietly in the chest, known only to those who have forgotten the need to prove joy. The boy, no longer quite a boy, though still young in years, walked the path between houses slowly, noticing things for the first time that had always been there. The way moss, gathered in the shape of a spiral on a low stone wall, the tiny crack in the doorframe of the weaver's house, where morning light always fell, the hush between the two temple bells, just as they were about to chime. He passed the tea house. Its door was open, and inside, a single lantern swayed on its cord. He entered without sound. The room was empty, yet full of memory, of waiting, of breath that had not yet become wind. The scroll no longer rested on the table. The bowl was gone, but the space remained, and that space was sacred. He sat where he had once sat in confusion. Now he sat in quiet, and there, on the tatami mat in front of him, was something unexpected, a folded cloth. He opened it. Inside, a piece of washi paper, blank. Beside it, a brush, and beside that, a single petal from a cherry blossom tree, pressed flat, preserved by time. He stared at the paper, then the brush, then the brush. The room did not breathe. It listened, and in that silence, a thought formed, not loud, not clear, but deep. What if wisdom does not ask us to draw new maps, but to leave space for the unspoken? He dipped the brush into the inkstone nearby, though no one had prepared it as the bristles touched the paper. His hand did not tremble. He did not write words. He drew a circle, imperfect, open at the end, an ensu, the symbol of the void, and of everything. He placed the cherry blossom at its center. The brush was set down. He folded the cloth again, and left the paper behind. When he stepped outside, the moon had risen, a full golden mirror, in the sky, above the rooftops. Lanterns hung quietly, not lit, not waiting, simply there. And in one of them, the smallest one, the wind stirred. It made the lantern sway, and in that movement, the boy saw a question unfold. What if the light we seek is not the flame, but the space it protects? He smiled. He walked past the sleeping trees, past the river stones, past the old gate that no longer needed to be closed. Each step now felt like a word in a prayer he had never learned, but had always known. And above him, the lantern swayed once more, as if it too had remembered to dream of the moon. Morning arrived not with noise, but with a softness that felt older than time, a hush that moved through the folds of the village like steam over still water. The boy, or the one who had once been called a boy, awoke not to the sound of birdsong or voices, but to the breath of the earth itself. A breath, slow, deep, and knowing. He stepped out into the first light. Mist curled along the stone path like forgotten thread. The trees held their dew like offerings, each drop trembling on the cusp of release. Nothing demanded, nothing explained. It was a morning that asked only this: will you witness what asks for nothing? His feet carried him to the old bell tower at the edge of the village, where time was once measured, not by clocks, but by ceremony. The bell itself hung from an aged beam, dark with weather, carved with prayers so worn they no longer needed to be read. They had become part of the wood. He stood beneath it, looked up, and listened. The bell had not rung in many seasons, not from disuse, but from respect, in the way silence is not absence, but a presence too full for words. Still, the rope remained, braided and thick, frayed only where the hands of elders once touched it during moon ceremonies. He did not reach for the rope, he simply bowed, and as his forehead lowered toward the earth, a memory emerged, not of this life alone, but of many. Villagers walking barefoot to the fields, mothers pressing rice, cakes into small hands, an old monk whispering a cone beside a winter fire, a girl laughing beneath falling blossoms, then gone too soon. Each moment floated by like leaves on the river of time, and vanished, and he, the witness to all of it, was no longer separate. He was the bell. He was the hand that rang it. He was the silence that followed as he straightened. The wind stirred just enough to lift the chime beside the tower beam. It rang once, pure, clear, a note not struck by force, but by permission, and in that single tone a truth echoed. The most sacred bells are the ones we do not ring, because the sound they hold is meant for the soul, not the ear. He sat beneath the bell, not to wait, not to pray, but simply to be. The hours passed like the shifting of light, unnoticed, undeniable. People passed now and then, each offering a nod, a glance, a bow. Not one of them spoke. They knew the boy had returned. But more than that, he had become part of the village that never needed to be found, because it had always existed in the still places. Between breaths, the trees swayed, the rope dangled, the bell hung above, and below it, the boy rested, not seeking, not asking, not remembering, not just breathing. And somewhere between the chime's fading echo and the rustling of pine, a final question lingered, soft as mist. If nothing is lost, what then are we always trying to find? Night came again, not like a curtain drawn, but like ink poured slowly into still water, a deepening, a quieting, a return. The village did not light its lanterns, not out of forgetfulness, but because light was no longer something they needed to summon. It lived within them now. The boy, the traveler, the seeker, the one who had once stood trembling beneath cherry blossoms, sat once more at the threshold of the tea house, no longer outside it, no longer inside it, but between. And it was there, in that tender liminality, that he noticed something. A single cherry blossom had returned, not on the tree, not carried by the wind, but resting on the tatami mat beside him, as though placed by an unseen hand. Perfect, fragile, silent. He picked it up. Its petals were pale and soft, tinged with the faintest edge of gold, and in that moment he understood, not as a thought, but as a remembering that came not from the mind, but from the part of the soul that watches. Lifetimes like seasons. This was never about the flower, nor the path, nor the scroll, nor the scroll, nor the bell, nor the mountain. Each had been a mirror, each had been a bowl, each had held the same question. What if the gold we seek was always beneath the petal? The wind moved gently across the floorboards. The paper door rustled. The sky shimmered between deep blue and black, a sky not waiting for stars, but holding space for them. He placed the blossom in the empty bowl, the one the master had once used, the one no longer needed for tea, and suddenly, without fanfare, the bowl glowed, not with light, but with memory. All that had passed the journey, the silence, the teachings, the grief, the stillness, the unspoken transformations, it all lived in that one small gesture. A petal in a bowl, a whisper, in a world of thunder. He bowed, not low, not dramatic, just enough to honor the space between things. Then, rising, he stepped out into the night. No path, no guide, no need, because the journey had never been about returning to the village. It had been about becoming the village. The stillness. The tea. The unspoken. The unseen. The stone. The scroll. The sound that follows silence. The breath that follows loss. The flame that never needed to be lit. And as he walked once more through the quiet forest path, now dark, now moonlit, now ageless, a final voice stirred not in the trees, but from within. Perhaps the stone was never outside. Perhaps the bell was always within. And maybe, just maybe, the journey was the transformation all along. He paused, closed, his eyes smiled, and disappeared into the hush, where all beginnings are endings, and all endings begin again.